Hello everyone. Our research is on the tax reform and labor supply of the middle-aged and elderly. And here is our group member list. This is the content of this presentation.
Let me introduce our topic. Fiscal policy is an important tool for regulating income distribution, and the personal income tax is an important tool for the government to regulate the income gap between individuals. In economic theory, changes in personal income tax affect changes in wages, with two effects on labor supply, the income effect and the substitution effect. As wages increase, the substitution effect outweighs an income effect, and the most workers prefer to increase their labor supplied hours to earn higher incomes.
My theoretical literature review will sort out the scholars' research on the impact of individual income tax on labor supply. Firstly, scholars mainly focus on the two opposite forces of income effect and substitution effect to link labor price and labor supply. If the tax reform makes the income effect greater than the substitution effect, the labor supply will be reduced. On the contrary, the labor supply will increase. Secondly, from the perspective of labor participation rate or labor time investment, under the control of the average wage tax burden, the highly progressive personal income tax system reduces the unemployment rate and improves the labor participation rate. Then, I summarize the four consensus reached by scholars. First, the labor supply is greatly affected by the change of individual income tax in the short term, but greatly affected by the economic cycle in the long term. Secondly, in most cases, the sensitivity of labor participation is greater than labor time. Then, in the gender differences, the labor supply elasticity of men is less than that of women. Finally, there are great differences in labor supply elasticity between the different income groups. Finally, it puts forward the current research challenges and suggestions. The main difficulty is that the merging test rate and later supply faced by individuals are endogenous, and the missing variables such as marginal test rate, labor income level, micro individual differences, and the macroeconomic operation trend will also lead to errors in the estimation of the model. Therefore, more in-depth research is needed at the micro level. In addition to the analysis of different income and gender groups, it can also be combined with regional factors so as to better play the role of individual income tax reductions policies in promoting labor supply. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Chen Peng. Now I will talk about the empirical literature review part of this research. The classic foreign literature on empirical research can be divided into three methods: maximal likelihood method, instrumental variables method, differences method. Hausman and Rood estimate the labor supply equation for married women using the maximal likelihood method under the assumption of a non-linear budget constraint based on macro-sectional data from the 1975 PSID. They estimate the net wage elasticity for married women to be about 1. Burtness uses time series data from 1968 to 1988 in the CPS to analyze trends in labor supply for different demographic groups using an instrumental variables approach and found that changes in net wage rates really affect labor hours rather than labor participation rates. Using a natural experiment, the U.S. Tax Reform Act of 1986, which differentially affects married women of different income, ELSA applies the difference in differences method from the natural experiment to estimate the labor supply response of a group of married high-income women. The found that the US EITC increased the labor force participation rate of single mothers by 2.8 percentage points, but had no significant effect on hours worked. In summary, when analyzing the labor supply effects of personal income tax, foreign scholars have focused on combining theory and empirical evidence to explore the transmission mechanism of the impact of personal income tax on labor supply and have conducted empirical studies on different gender, age, and income groups. The DID method has the following advantages. First, it can largely avoid the problem of endogeneity. It effectively controls the interaction effect between the dependent variables and independent variables. Second, in contrast to the traditional method, which assess policy effects by setting up a dummy variable for the occurrence of policy and then running a regression, the DID method has a more scientific model setting and can estimate policy effects more accurately. Third, the principles and model settings of the DID method are simple and easy to understand and apply, unlike special measures and other methods that are not as complex. However, few Chinese scholars have systematically analyzed the middle-aged and older labor groups from an age perspective. In addition, the literature that has studied the labor supply effects of the tax burden has not considered heterogeneous features such as child rearing in the household factor. This paper intends to fill the research gap by using the idea to delve deeper into the above-mentioned perspectives so that the findings are more relevant and can better exploit the effect of personal tax reduction policies on the labor supply of mid and old age. That's all from me. Thank you.
So in this section, let's turn to methodology. We'll first discuss the data we used in this paper and then explain the model. The data we used are from 2011 to 2015 China Health and Retirement Longitude Study. It is a national household survey to collect a set of macro data representative of Chinese households and individuals aged 45 and above. In addition, the regional data used in this paper were obtained from the China Urban and Provincial Statistical Yearbook. There are two advantages to using the database. Firstly, it is the only nationwide macro survey in China that targets middle-aged and elderly people. Secondly, the first survey was conducted before the personal income tax reform in 2011, and with the combination of national tracking services in 2013 and 2015 allows us for the information of panel data. As for the processing methods, we deducted individuals who did not respond or died in the survey, and retained individuals with non-agriculture employed and with non-bureau income. Well, we use difference in difference model in this paper. Let's first look at the dependent variable, labor supply. It includes dummy variable for labor participation and weekly labor hours. As for the independent variables, they are treatment for experimental group, reform for personal tax reform, and treatment multiply reform for difference in differences estimator. We also control for individual fixed efforts and regional differences. The estimated coefficient of most interest in this paper is upper 3, which represents the joint marginal effect of the experimental group and the personal tax reform. If the value is greater than 0, then the tax reform has a positive effect on the labor supply of experimental group. If the value is less than 0, then the tax reform has a depressive effect on the experimental group. If the value is not significant, then the effect of the tax reform can be ignored. To see the main results of tax, let's turn to the next section.
Hello everyone, I'm Sun Qizhi. Now, please allow me to introduce the analysis part of our research. Okay, at first, the theoretical analysis part of the paper attempts to build a theoretical model of the effects of tax reform on individual labor supply rates and in labor supply time based on the new classical mode of labor later by ending nonlinear budget constraints to provide a theoretical framework for the empirical analysis that follows. At first, we construct the following general labor supply equation. Look at this equation. The LD means the labor that workers want to supply, and the WAT means wage after tax, and the Y means unearned income. By analyzing the extensive margin, we hypothesize the tax break will have a positive effect on the labor force participation rate, and by analyzing the intensive margin, we conjecture that the tax break have limited effect in encouraging workers to increase labor hours. As for the empirical analysis, overall, the tax reform resulted in about 6% higher labor force participation rate in the experimental group. In contrast, the effect of tax reform impact on the weekly labor hours of middle-aged and older workers is now significant. And the estimation results suggest that differences in labor participation and working hours between genders do exist. Men will be generally more sensitive to labor participation than women, but women are more effective than men in terms of working hours. In the following, we analyze how intra-household nurturing behavior affects the response of labor supply to tax reforms through a triple differencing approach. The results show that after considering family neutral or grandchildren, men exhibit an income effect, while women exhibit a substitution effect of the tax reform.
So we get a conclusion. Tax reform has a significant impact on the labor supply of middle-aged and elderly people. The labor supply effect of the tax burden varies across income levels, with labor supply tending to decline as the tax burden decreases. The labor behavior of the individuals beyond the statutory retirement age is largely unaffected by the tax reform. Moreover, in the household division of the labor framework, the labor supply effect of the tax burden on women increases with the increase in support behavior and support expenditure, reflecting a substitution effect, while men show a weaker income effect. Then we get some recommendations. First, promote China's microeconomic development and raise the level of national per capita income. Second, personal income tax reform should focus on narrowing in the income gap between people in different income brackets. Third, scientific design of the tax rate model to ensure that the tax policy will promote employment growth. Fourth, strengthen the promotion and administration of taxation. Thank you.